everyone, I'm Rebecca and welcome back to my sewing room. I am back from costume college, obviously, and I am just feeling like I kind of need to ease slowly back into sewing. So this week I have picked out what I'm hoping will be a relatively simple, quick project to do, also one that I can potentially bring with me when I have to go on a work trip in like 5 days. So yeah, that is going to be this right here. This is a mid-19-teens dress. The pattern is by A Stitchin' Times line over on Instagram. They have an Etsy as well. I'll link them down below, both the Instagram and the Etsy. But I saw this pattern. It just came out pretty recently, like just a couple of weeks ago. And I saw it and I thought, oh my gosh, it is so freaking cute. And so I kind of put it in the back of my mind as something that I would like to do fairly soon. And then when I was thinking about what project to do this week, I thought, oh my gosh, that one is going to be perfect. So I went over to Etsy and I picked up the pattern. And then I wasn't sure which version I should make because there are 3 different versions that you can do of this dress. You can do plain skirt, you can do a tucked skirt so that there are 3 tucks around the skirt as it goes down, or you can do the ruffled one so there are 3 tiers of ruffles on the skirt. And I wasn't sure between the tucked version and the ruffled version which one I should do for this project, so I went over to ye old Instagram, of course, and polled you guys. And although it was fairly close-ish, like 40 to 60%. 60% of you said ruffles, and I was kind of leaning that way anyway, so I figured that that worked out well. And I have chosen this cotton fabric for the project. This is from Joann's. I think I actually picked this up around the same time that I did the 1840s American Girl dress with the intentions of doing an American Girl dress in the future. So I did not get very much of it, but I think I got way more than enough for this project here. So when I do a printed home pattern, I print out just the pattern pages, not the instructions. I just refer to my laptop for those. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut all of these pattern pieces out and then cut them out in the cotton, and we can start putting everything together. All of the pieces are now cut out. I cut all of the pieces, both lining and outer, in the same fabric just because I have a bunch of it. I still have a bunch left. And now that I've cut them out, or in some cases ripped them, because these long ruffle pieces, I actually just ripped them. They give the dimensions. They don't give like a pattern piece for those. So you get a page with dimensions for if you are doing either fabric, or also you can use like eyelet lace, for example. So I've obviously gone for the fabric, and I've cut and ripped everything out, and I've even gone in and done my marking of like darts, or in some cases there's like a ruffle start stop, for example. So now we can go ahead and start assembling. First step is to take our lining front pieces and make the world's tiniest darts in them, and then join the lining fronts to the lining backs. Everything has a 1/4 inch seam allowance, so it is quite tiny, as you can see, and then all of those seams get pressed. So one of the things that I like to do on a smaller project like this, instead of going through and doing like, okay, step by step, this is the next step on the bodice, etc., because they basically have you finish the bodice first before moving on to the skirt. That's a lot of like back and forth from the cutting table and ironing in the machine, and it means that I have to turn off my air conditioner every time I want to use my iron. And yes, I have not yet put away stuff from costume college and my table's a mess. But yeah, I don't want to do that. So I've actually gone and I've like pressed in all of my hems already. I went and I serged this edge. The next step before I can do the gathering stitches here is actually to press that down, interestingly enough, so that I guess we don't have like kind of raw serging there. I've run the gathering stitches on these though and pressed the hems. I've run the gathering stitches on the bodice fronts where it joins into the shoulder, and I've hemmed these pieces as well, which I then was told to put aside for a little bit. So now I can go in and do kind of the next steps of each of these, like attach these to the backs and press this part down and run the gathering stitches. And then I figure out what the next steps are over here, because I think it's honestly put the ruffles on, but obviously that I can't do kind of batch. So each time I go through and I do what I can with the pieces that I have, and then move on to the next step so that I can, again, turn off the AC and turn on the iron. So the result of all of my next steps is right here. We've got the sleeve ruffles put on the sleeve. I like that there's kind of the added step of like After you sew these together with the 1/4 inch seam allowance, they say to serge or zigzag the edge so you get a nice finished edge. So that's what you're seeing there. I also have the fronts added to the backs here, and that got pressed up, and now I think we're just going to stitch that down, and then that's going to get encased because we have the lining. And then over here I did do one extra step with these ruffles that I'm still working on fitting to the base fabric, but I went and I marked my centers both here and also on the base fabric. That's not part of the steps of this pattern, but I do highly recommend it. In hindsight, I actually would have also marked the 1/4 points in these ruffles and on the base fabric, and frankly I will probably do that for the 3 portions of these that I have not yet started to gather. It's too late for this one. The other thing here just to note is that because we have folded this over and we're now running our gathering stitches through those 2 layers together, it's being really hard to pull the stitches up, and I am a little worried that they're going to snap, so I'm going super slowly on that. But once they're gathered, these are just going to get, I think, top stitched to that line there, so they butt up against that line, and the slightly shorter one will go up against that line, and then the shortest ruffle will actually wind up just going flat to this, and they'll get gathered together. So again, we will be gathering multiple layers, but you know, no way to get around that. So that's kind of how that construction goes, and now it is time to do the next steps on all of those pieces. I've just completed the next set of steps here. The skirt is basically done at this point. We're just waiting to add it to the bodice and sew up the back seam. The bodice is getting a little bit closer here, so I'm surprised that this wasn't gathered at the same time in the same step as the top of it, but that is the next thing. I need to gather this section here so that it can fit to the lining like you see here, but I just did the seam that attached the outer to the lining, so that's why that looks all nice and finished on that edge now. And then the other edge, I think we are just going to baste around the edge once we have gathered this up to fit. So there's our fronts. There's again a couple more steps left for the bodice, like for example adding the sleeves. The sleeves themselves I think are all set at this point, so the next thing that we're going to do with the sleeves is add them into the bodice, because stuff this small a lot of times, and I think that's what we're doing in this pattern, it kind of gets assembled as flat as you can. That's why, for example, like all of these ruffles are going to go into the back seam. Like we finished them off with serging right here, and they're not going to stand out each separate in the back seam. They're going to get tucked in there just because it's much easier to put that all on flat. Likewise, we do the whole bodice section here, attach the sleeves, and probably that will wind up getting tucked into the lining somehow. I haven't read that part of the instructions yet, but we attach the sleeves flat like that and then do up the side seam and side underarm part of the sleeve all at once. So that makes it just a little bit easier because this stuff is really hard to get around a machine when it's so tiny. And speaking of which, so tiny, this fabric honestly is wrong for this project. Like this skirt feels so heavy and bulky. It's just quilting cotton, but I think that for this project, you can see it stand up on its own. For this project, you really need something a lot lighter weight than this. So yeah, if you are going to make this, I would recommend probably staying away from quilting cottons. It has also made the gathering more difficult. I snapped a thread up here. I snapped a thread on one of the other ones just because gathering through 2 of these layers of quilting cotton, it just hasn't been wanting to pull up without snapping threads. So maybe go with a slightly lighter fabric, though I do think this is really cute, and I'll bet that this fabric would work totally fine in human scale. So this is what it looks like when the sleeve is joined into the bodice, but everything is still flat. I did have quite a bit of trouble trying to get the sleeve to be an actual fitted sleeve. I just felt like there was too much sleeve to make it fitted. So you can see I do have some gathers in there, but that's what it looks like flat. This is what the inside looks like. I would recommend one little variation from the pattern besides maybe making the actual sleeve itself a little bit smaller, which is the pattern says to sew those together and then to serge this area or zigzag this area. I found it very difficult to get this around in my serger just because it's so tight and small and curved, and I would serge those flat before adding them together. It doesn't really matter that you would have like 2 pieces to the seam there. Once it's serged, you know, both edges are going to be finished, and frankly it is doll clothes. I love the fact that everything is so well finished in here, but yeah, I would do that before those are put together. And then this gets serged here. This is the underarm both on the sleeve and the bodice. And then that all gets joined together. So you can see this is pinned in place right now. This is the sleeve, this is the bodice, and I'm going to sew this seam right here. And then the front two pieces get overlapped and joined over in the front. So the other side's going to overlap over here. We do a little measurement with a dot of where it should come together. And that is how the front is done, kind of like that. And then this gets stitched down. Like you can see that I already have top stitching on this side. This side's going to get top stitched down, which is going to keep those two in place right there. And we also stitch around here to get that kind of corner of that overlap right there. And once that is done, I think we basically have the bodice. It gets attached into a waistband. You can see the waistband outer and liner, which is again the same fabric here. And then it gets attached to the skirt and the back seam gets done, and it's basically a dress. So we are super, super close at this point, and I should have this finished momentarily. And this is what it looks like with the bodice all together and the waistband attached. You can see the little lining waistband ready to be folded down, because now we can finally attach the skirt to the bodice and then flip the waistband down and then sew up the back, and I think we're done. So the skirt is now attached to the bodice, but I do want to bring a couple things to your attention. One, if you are like me and you haven't been super careful about where the ends of your ruffles meet, because you have already now serged them in, you can't adjust them at all. And yeah, mine don't meet right here. This top one, this one meets, but this one, the bottom one, or the middle one, I guess, does not meet. So, oh well, I mean, it is a doll dress after all, and it is in the back. The other thing is that it has you assemble this center back seam and then go around and whip stitch the inside of this waistband down and kind of like catch the ends in and stuff. But you could also potentially do that. Like if you do this part before you do this, you could actually pull this down and stitch in the ditch from the outside. So you'd stitch right along there and it should be able to catch the inside, just as a heads up if you want to do less hand sewing. But at this point, I think everything for machine sewing is done. And this is what the dress looks like from the exterior, basically finished. So the remainder of this project is just whip stitch down that little bit in there, the inner waistband, which also is going to be kind of tight and fiddly to do. I mean, obviously I'll turn it right back outside, but yes, whip stitch that down and like get the ends in there too. I have to double check the instructions on how it says to do that, but it is over here on the next step of the instructions. And then also put 3 snaps in the back to close it up, and then the dress will be done. So I will show you in a moment what it looks like on a doll. And here we go. Here is the finished dress. I think it looks very, very cute. I love all of the ruffles. This fabric, because it is a much stiffer quilting cotton than I think this pattern is intended for, it does stand out quite a bit from the body. So there is definitely no need for any petticoat. And this is that kind of weird mid-19-teens look. This is for 1916, where in like 1915 and 16, the skirts got a lot fuller than they had been before, and then they decreased again right afterwards. So this is that weird mid-decade where the skirts are so nice and full and lovely. I did add a little velvet ribbon sash right here because I felt like it needed a pop of contrast, and also sashes were really popular in this era. I think it looks beautiful on Yvette. Let me just show you again some of the details, like the gathering in the bodice and the little ruffle on the sleeves. And let's turn her around so you can see all of the rest of the dress as well. So you can see just quite how much fullness there is in the back. This pattern did come with an option to make the waist just a little bit smaller for newer dolls like Yvette. I made the larger size so that any of my dolls could wear it. So because of that, it is just a little bit large on Yvette here at the waist, but the sash kind of hides that nicely, I think. And the whole thing is just very, very pretty. So I definitely would recommend this pattern. I think that the directions were very easy to follow. I made my couple of adaptations to the pattern, but yeah, overall I really like it. So I think that just about covers it with everything on this project. This, by the way, is just Julie's birthday hat that I paired it with and Rebecca's Hanukkah shoes, I think, if you were curious. But again, I do really recommend this pattern. I think it was just such a nice, like, ease back into sewing. I may actually do another ease back into sewing project next week because, as I mentioned, I think earlier in this video, I have to go on a work trip in 2 days. And when I get back, it's entirely possible that I may be jumping right into rehearsals for a new show. So I may need another nice, easy sewing project like this, where you don't have to worry about fitting or trying things on or anything like that, even just like cutting large pieces on the floor, because that is actually the next project that I have for myself, which is going to be a 1950s inspired summer dress for myself with fabric that I got in the fabric district. So that will be coming soon, but there might possibly be another project before that one. So yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this video. Again, the link to the pattern is down in the description below. I don't actually know if A Stitch in Time's line has any other patterns currently available for sale. I hope that they do create more in the future because I did like this one so much. I do have a few other doll sewing videos on this channel, so if that's something that you are into, I will leave a link to a little playlist right up here so that you can go check those out. Sometimes it's nice to see things in a smaller scale, especially things that are quite historical. To be honest, I really might make something like this for myself in the future, maybe not out of this identical fabric, because again, we have now discussed that this is quite heavy. Now, I don't know if it would be heavy for a person size. It might just be too heavy of a cotton for a doll size. But this was actually inspired by a pattern from Wearing History, and I realized that this bodice shape is basically the bodice that I did for my check dress, my 19 teens check dress from a few years ago that was copied off of Antique in my collection. I will leave a link to that playlist up here as well. And I know that that's a pattern that I promised that I would get out to you guys at some point for sale and still haven't done because digitizing patterns is hard. Once I figure out how to do that, I will release more patterns. Like, that is my plan, but I haven't figured out how to do that yet, unfortunately. But yeah, I might be able to just use the bodice shape from that to make this. And then the skirt is literally strips of fabric. So like, that's super, super easy. And it might just be like a really fun project that I could get away with wearing both for modern and also for historical. So I definitely like that idea. But if you liked this video, please go ahead and click the thumbs up icon. And if you'd like to see more videos like this from me, please go ahead and click subscribe and the little bell icon to be notified every time I post a new video. I do post videos here on YouTube at least once a week with sewing vlogs like this out on Tuesdays, and sometimes additional sewing or costuming content out on Saturdays. But I post every day over on my Instagram, so please go follow me on Instagram. That's at Lady Rebecca Fashions. And I do also have a doll Instagram at Lady Rebecca Dolls. And if you'd like to help support all of the work that I do on this channel, I do have a link to my Patreon and my Ko-fi down in the description below, or you can send me a super thanks or join my YouTube channel memberships right here on YouTube below the video. I'd also like to give a special shout out to my Edwardian level patrons, Jean, Dan, and Kim. Thank you all so much for joining me today. I hope you all have a wonderful week, and I will see you very soon in my next video. Happy sewing!